Hello everyone, Kirby1 here, and welcome to the beginning of my first Dominion 6 YouTube multiplayer Let's Play game. And this game, I'm going to be playing as Asphodel, and showcasing all of the things that I've come to enjoy about this nation and how it has changed in Dominion 6. Now, I know that a little while ago, when the patch came out that first started to do massive changes to Asphodel in Dominion 6, I went over a lot of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of information in that video that goes over the ways that Asphodel has changed from being what was arguably one of the, or if not the worst nation in Dominions 5 to we're not quite sure yet, but probably significantly better than it was in Dominion 6. And so this video is going to be different than that, because it's going to be the stereotypical just sort of nation overview as part 1, followed by pretender design and various strategy ideas in part 2, and then going straight into first couple of turns, expansion, etc., first wars, all that jazz. So, you guys can go ahead and read the lore bits right up here. I will say for myself that it was one of the things that really drew me to being in love with this particular nation, but as is typical for my channel, I don't really read it to you guys, so you can do that on your own. Now let's go through and break through the national features, because there's a lot of text here and it is very important, and it gives you a starting point on where your nation goes, the kinds of ways that you build it out, and the kinds of things that you can do with it. And then we'll go into the troop roster, and we'll call it there and do pretender design, like I say, in the second video. So for starters, your race is going to be just forest beings, just like Pan. Basically, your roster is almost exactly the same as Pan's units, but with variations. And then in addition to that, you get reanimated and free spawn Caren troops, which we'll go over as well. Many of your troops are stealthy, but some noticeable ones are not, and that's very important to make a note of in how you are moving your troops around and the kind of strategies that you employ. And again, lots of undead, which is both a strength and a weakness for your typical nations that utilize a lot of undead. The kind of troops that you're going to have are satyrs, minotaurs, centaurs, archers, flying harpy troops, as well as flying harpy scouts that are recruitable in a lot of different places. And then lots and lots and lots of mannequins and carrion beasts and general troops like that, the undead kind. And that will also affect your army composition, and it's very important to note, just like I was talking about with the stealthy troops and the non-stealthy troops, none of your carrion are going to be stealthy, so that is going to heavily impact the kinds of strategies that you use. The kind of magic that you're going to have is very big nature, death, but not that big. It's sort of like middling death. The kind of important points to hit for death would be things like death 4 in order to then break into death 5, and that can be a little hard on your nation, so that's something to keep in mind. Glamour, but also kind of low glamour. With glamour and the new glamour paths that you have on nations, you have two different kinds of glamour nations, I would say. You've got low glamour nations, which really can't do anything without Twilight and need to have the ability to build their pretenders to forge boosters if they want them. And then you have the big glamour nations, and Asphodel is not one of the big glamour nations. So being able to find a way to get glamour access for boosters on your nation in order to ramp you up is important. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck at Glamour 2 with Twilight helping you out to get a little bit higher, but only in battle magic. earth, and earth is also very low. So that is another thing that you're going to have to consider is if you want to get up to, for example, earth 3 and doing things like forging hammers and things like that, or ramping up to higher earth, build into your pretender or figure out ways to break into higher earth. And then water is also the same, can be very low. And this is a big deal because if you are going into water, which you can do very easily with a lot of amphibious undead, you will have not as competitive a time against other water nations that have higher water and are able to spam water elementals at you better than you can back at them. So very important to keep in mind things like that. Priests are average, but that is not entirely true because you have summonable Holy Threes, which is a very big deal, and they're very easily summonable too. The reason they're very easily summonable is because you have a massive nature income, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, the thing is, because the summonable Holy Threes are undead, they can't preach, so that is a thing to note as well, but it does allow you to have a lot more access to divine blessing than you would normally have if you don't have access to Holy Threes, and then also can set you up for things like throne rushes when people wouldn't be necessarily expecting it, or things like that. Your Dominion reanimates the unburied dead as mannequins. Now, the way that this works and the way that it's phrased is reanimate is sort of a keyword that applies specifically to what your priests are usually able to do. Typically speaking, a nation can only reanimate undead if they have a tag that says Reanimator Priest, which your mages do not have. And that applies to both your living mages, and it also applies to your undead mages. However, nationally speaking, Asphodel has a specific nation-related tag that's sort of like a secret tag that allows any priest that is undead to be able to reanimate undead. And so it sort of bypasses that for all undead, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to do that unless they had specifically the reanimator tag, which you see on something like Mound Fiends, which is a summonable thing. And that would apply also to all undead. However, Asphodel, anything that is both undead and a priest can reanimate, but what this particular bit means for the reanimates unburied undead is more what we would describe in the community as free spawn. And the specific type of free spawn that applies for Asphodel is that it free spawns based on corpses in the province. So if there are no corpses, you will not get free spawn. And that will happen when the population of a province reaches 0, or in the case of Asphodel specifically, if a province that has a fort reaches the fort cap limit of it's not going to go down, the population is not going to go down below that limit. So it's very important to remember that as long as you have corpses in your province, you will get free spawn mannequins in any province that you own and has your dominion. The other aspect of that, which is very important, is that your dominion will tell you whether there are corpses in a province. And that's also a free tag from just being Asphodel. Now, as we move on from that, in Dominion, carrion beasts everywhere but more in forests. This is actually incorrect. What happens is that you get mannequins everywhere but carrion beasts in forests. So in provinces that are not forests, you will only get ever mannequins or specifically mandragora, and that's based on magic skills. Temples and growth scales increase reanimation rates, yes, and the temples will also allow for sacred reanimated Caren, of which you have 2 types, and we'll go over those as well. That only applies to forests. So once you build a temple in a forest, then that forested temple will start having a chance to give you one of your 2 or both of your 2 sacred Caren, but and so that also applies if there's no fort there. In addition to that, you also have a chance of getting sometimes a free spawn sacred commander, the Carian Centaur, which is just a holy one, but because he's undead, it will allow you to reanimate even more. And again, that's using the reanimate command, not the free spawn mechanic, as we're talking about here. And then magic scales increases a chance for better reanimations, and that applies to specific types of the carrion beasts and also mandragoras in every other province. And this does not actually, from a bunch of testing from other people, this does not specifically apply to your sacreds. So if you wanted to make a build where you are focusing on your sacreds and you don't care about getting things like the elephants or the bears or the minotaurs or things like that, then you don't have to focus on your magic scales. You can instead focus on just your growth, temples, and higher, for example, Dominion score, and you will get more of your sacred still, but less of those other types. So that's a thing to keep in mind there. And then very, very importantly, what sets Asphodel apart from a lot of other nations is that it is a pop kill nation. And so because of that, in a lot of games, you will find that pop kill is banned, and so that does apply to Asphodel, and you may not have the opportunity to play as them unless you can make a compelling argument for why it's okay for you to play as Asphodel. Now, as far as your skills and blesses, you don't get any extra bless points, but you get a increased growth limit of +2, which is one of the highest in the game for growth specifically, and very few nations get +2 to scales, which means that your Dominion, if you take max growth, is able to go up to growth 4. And then, obviously, with thrones or other effects, you are able to get up to growth 5 pretty easily. And then magic, also, you are able to go up to magic 3. And in both of these cases, they do not stack with pretenders, as we already know from just generally building pretenders and stuff like that. You have only access to very primitive forts, and that is the forts that you build with gold. These are very, very bad. What that means is that you are only able to build up to or upgrade up to palisades as a max. And on top of that, you building them yourself is 50% more expensive. This also does apply to any palisades that you might be sieging and taking from another player in an early war. So if somebody has put up a palisade on your border and you're like, I'm going to jump this guy and steal their palisade, it may or may not be worth waiting until they upgrade it to a regular fort. Your palisades will not give you an extra commander point, so they are very, very bad. And because they're 50% more expensive, since a normal fort is 1,000 gold, a primitive fort palisade that Asphodel built is 1,500 gold, and that's as high as you can upgrade it to for one commander point, and the palisade is like 100 siege defense. So it's just never do this. It's just so bad. The one situation where you would maybe want to do this is in a throne province, but the ideal scenario is you take thrones that are forests, you let other people take thrones and fort them to better fort levels for you, and then you jump them afterward, or you tech up to things like Wizard Tower or other magic phase forts, because palisades are just so bad and so expensive that you never want to have them. So just something to keep in mind. Temples costs 300 in forests, and this will also benefit you greatly because the higher your growth limit, the more likely it is for provinces to change into forests, which then allow you to build more forests and things like more temples for cheap and stuff like that. And then in addition to this, temples produce nature gems, and this is something that I went over in the Asphodel Changes video, which is that this is a very, very special synergy for Asphodel that no other nation has, because you get cheap temples and you get nature gem income from temples. And the mechanic works very similarly to the other pop kill nations like Lemuria and Ermor, where it matches the nature gem income with your number of temples. And then labs also cost 300 in forts. So on top of both of this, temples and labs, that allows you to pay 600 to lab and temple forest, and then 35 nature gems with your national spell to grow a 2 commander point fortress in a forest. And that can really speed up your early game economy a lot faster than basically any other nation, because it's super cheap for you, and it allows you to utilize a variety of different resource types. But it will definitely sort of depend whether you want to grow fortresses or you want to summon reanimators or things like that. It's going to be like a cost-benefit analysis for you to think about. So at this point, let's get into the different troop types, and we'll go over each of them. You've got Harpies, which are Harpies, and they have 2 attacks, and they are flyers, and they are stealthy, but they have really bad hit points, they have really bad stats, and general stuff like that. But their patrol strength is awesome. Their ability to defend and siege forts is awesome. So they have very, very specific and important uses for your nation, but you will not probably be seeing a whole lot of them. It's just like in the specific circumstances that you need them, remember that they are there and that they are great. You can also recruit them in unforted forests. So that's super awesome. You have a triple type of satyrs right here. You've got satyr sneaks, which I have opinions about satyr sneaks, and the opinions are not sort of related to their stats in general. They're fine. They're actually pretty decent for as far as troops go. They're better than militia. They're undisciplined, stealthy, unfortunately, obviously, and they don't really have a whole lot of armor. They have a meh attack, but and they're super cheap. The problem with satyr sneaks is that the insult to injury that Asphodel gets is that your starting army starts with satyr sneaks, and satyr sneaks have an causes unrest tag. This can be a lot of fun if you have a strategy where you want to mass a bunch of sneaky satyr sneaks and stealth them into another player's province, and then have them secretly causing unrest and annoying the crap out of them. But the fact that you have a starting army which starts with cause unrest means that you have to make an executive decision on turn 1 to do one of 2 things. Either blind expand with a really crappy army of satyr sneaks and hope that they all die so you never have to think about them again, and probably fail expand, or you wait a turn, causing unrest in your capital, which then you have to patrol out, which kills your population, which you are already a pop kill nation, and then expand and still hope that they die. Because you don't want these guys for expansion. They are causing unrest in your lands, not in other people's lands. So I have strong opinions about satyr sneaks, and because I have strong opinions on them, I discount their existence and I despise them, and often forget that I could be using them for interesting ways, but it's just a personal flaw, and something for people to keep in mind that is going to be causing them problems in the beginning of the game, and now you know why. Regular satyrs are slight upgraded versions of them insofar as they don't cause unrest and they have a javelin, but other than that they're pretty much the same, still undisciplined, still sneaky, and still can be recruited in all forests. The satyr warriors cannot be recruited in forests, which means that they are recruited in your fortresses, And they're a slight upgrade, but very, very slight. They still don't have any armor, and they don't have a helmet, but they have a shield, and they're not undisciplined, but they also are not stealthy. So this is a very weird sort of situation of why would I want this? And I'm not sure yet. I still haven't really found a use case for them. But if people have use cases for them, it is relevant to remember that they exist. Now you have two types of centaur archers, two types of centaur not melee troops as well, the male and the female version. The centaur is the longbow version of of the archers, and they are expensive as far as just archers go, but a longbow is a very good weapon to have to supplement your armies and put in the back, dropping arrows on people. And the options that you have for arrow buffs are for Asphodel are the envenom arrows. And the thing with envenom and poisoned arrows is that they only apply the poison if the damage from the bow gets through. So it's poison effect on damage, which is a little bit worse than fire arrows, which is effect on hit, I believe, and it'll apply the fire damage. So you want a better bow to apply the envenom arrows tag to, because you're more likely to do damage. Additionally, the range is a lot better draw for you for having an archer, especially an archer at this cost. The other option for archers is the centaur-eyed archer, and it's the same cost, but for a short bow. And for short bows, you typically want massable short bows rather than, the expensive kind of short bows. They do have slightly better precision, which is going to then incrementally be better due to the fact that the shorter range means they will be firing at closer targets. But still, you don't really want them to be that close and then to be more susceptible to being in melee or anything like that. So I tend to default to just mindlessly spamming the regular longbow centaurs rather than the centaur-eyes with the short bows. But there is an argument to be made where you could be making them for the precision reasons, but I don't usually do that. In notable case, both of them are stealthy, and they also have recuperation, as is typical for just half men and half women. For the melee centaurs, you have the two varieties of the centaur-eyed and the centaur as well, warriors. Both of them are stealthy, which is great. The centaur-eyes have a javelin, which is fine, but the centaurs have berserk. And berserk is just such a powerful tag to have on a melee troop, because even if your commander gets sniped, you will stay in the combat and you will finish and wipe up whatever is remaining. And that's a very, very big benefit and draw over the centaur-eyes that I typically wind up also similarly mindlessly spamming the centaur warriors over the centaur-eyed warriors. So there is that. One other mention of notable mention is that centaur-eyes have a little bit higher defense, which of course, because of being berserk, is going to be even lower for centaur warriors, but that may or may not matter or bother people. So yeah, also the centaur warriors have a helmet, whereas the centaur-eyes do not. I think these four units, and also a lot of the satyrs, and obviously the harpies, are all very similar to the lineup that most of the Pan nations have. And the same can be said for the minotaurs as well. Now, the minotaurs, very importantly, do not have the stealthy tag. So if you're going to be using them, it's very important to remember that your opponent will see you using them and will know where they are at all times. So you can't really surprise people with minotaurs unless in some weird certain situation you are drawing an opponent in to siege your fort, for example, and the turn before the enemy army has sieged your fort, you recruited a crap ton of Minotaurs. And then suddenly, surprise, Minotaurs. That may or may not be some fun thing that you can do, but that's the only way that people aren't going to see Minotaurs coming. The two options that you have are the recruitable in forests option and the recruitable in fortresses option. The recruitable in forests, and also fortresses obviously, are undisciplined. That can make it a little bit harder to make them survivable, because the problem with Minotaurs is their trample, and their trample means they get into the middle of enemy formations and tend to be poked from all sides until they die. So the benefit to having the Minotaur warriors is that you can give them buffs by having them hold an attack, and that will make them a little bit more tanky once they get into the middle of the formation to an enemy formation to survive. However, in Dominion 6 versus Dominion 5, because of the increase in resource and gold options, I've been finding that I'm able to recruit a lot more Minotaurs in Dominion 6 than I was able to recruit in Dominions 5. So you can hit the spam button and summon a pretty sizable stack of emergency Minotaurs. And the key thing about Trample is that it works best in a critical mass. And that critical mass then allows you to either steamroll somebody, or if you don't have the critical mass, get surrounded and die. So because you're now able to hit that critical mass a little bit easier, it can be very beneficial to have Minotaurs as an option for very specific scenarios. And one of the specific scenarios that I tend to field them for is things like rushing the gate for a fort storm against human-sized opponents, because the Minotaurs will run in and just barrel over the human-sized fort defenders at the gate, and then allow the rest of your army to swarm through. Even if the Minotaurs died, you don't really care anymore. And then as far as being a trampler with Berserker, one of the real big benefits of Minotaurs versus other types of tramplers is that they typically will not retreat back over your own troops and trample your own mages and things like that, like elephants or some other kinds of tramplers tend to do. Minotaurs, because they go berserk, will go into the middle of a formation and then die rather than routing. So that's a little bit of a benefit to having Minotaurs. Now, as far as your sacreds go, they're both cap only. And you've got the black centaurs, which are your bread and butter, your staple of expansion for basically all Pan nations, from EA to MA Pan and Asphodel. I am honestly not very familiar with LA Pan to make a comment on whether it's the same for them. But one of the changes, as I mentioned in my other video, is that black centaurs have gotten +1 to berserk. So that is the only way that they stand out from how they are exactly the same from white centaurs in every way, and should be treated accordingly. The other option for you for sacreds is Black Minotaur, the new unit. And the Black Minotaurs are sacred and then a Berserk +5, as well as Tramplers, which is the same as your Minotaur Lord. And other than that, they are just really big, beefy Minotaurs, but they suffer from the same sort of problems that Minotaurs do, of if you don't have a critical mass, they're still going to get surrounded and stabbed to death, unless you take a very dedicated, like, protection-based bless, which doesn't really synergize very well with your black centaurs. Black centaurs and just sort of white centaur blesses are much more focused around the steamrolly aspect of them being super killy, stabbing everything with lances and hoofs and stuff like that, and getting things like blood surge popping on them and stuff like that. Black Minotaurs benefit from that, but if they take that, then they're still going to die because of the getting surrounded and trampling bit. So it's sort of a weird non-synergy between your two options. So you're going to be trying to think about, how do I want to build a bless that works for one and then not the other? And then on top of that, you have to consider both your thug options for your Caren lords, and then also your Caren troop option, sacred Caren troop options, which is your Sagittarians and your Caren Furies, which are also similarly not really synergizing very well with the kinds of blesses that you have for each of these. So it's a little bit weird. But that all said, Black Minotaurs can be very, very fun for killing things that are bigger than them and that have a lot of protection, like Pretenders or Giants or things like that, because of their very high attack and very high damage battle axe. And I say high attack because on top of the 12 and any experience stars that they have, you're getting +5 for going berserk. And you can make these guys go berserk pretty easily with things like spells that will make them go berserk and things like that, which you can get from nature and thaumaturgy. I'm blanking on the spell name right now, but we'll go over it a little bit later on in the series because it's something that I try out. But other than that, the reason why these guys aren't quite as massable as the Black Centaurs is their gold cost. And so for expansion and things like that, what I was talking about, how they get surrounded and poked to death, you're not going to be able to afford as many as you would the Black Centaurs, which surprisingly you're thinking like, well, Black Centaurs are pretty expensive. Well, Black Minotaurs are even more expensive than that. So that can be a pretty important and notable roadblock for you for using them specifically for expansion, which is why over time I've come to decide that I like Black Centaurs for expansion, but I like Black Minotaurs as having them as a backup option for like hitting things with a big hammer, or in their case, a big axe. And the other notable thing for them is that later on in the game, once you've started to lose all your population to your pop kill and stuff like that, their recruitment points are actually slightly less, very, very slightly less than a Black Centaur's. And so you may find that you might be able to get maybe 3 Black Minotaurs instead of 2 Black Centaurs out of your cap very, very late in the game. And that may or may not make the difference on what you decide or why you decide to recruit them or things like that. So just things to keep in mind as the game progresses. Now, as we move on to commanders, you've got Harpies, and Harpies are always universally awesome, especially because they can also be recruited in all forts at the same cost as a scout. And they're flying with ridiculous map move, and they have very high stealth, and can see everything and be everywhere, and are amazing, and you should be recruiting them at all times and in every place. You also have access to a Satyr Commander. Satyr Commander has average leadership, normal leadership, low stealthiness, but they are a stealthy commander. They are not an undead leader, and they are not a magic being leader, so they would only be relevant to your regular troops, your regular recruitable troops, and you would only care about leading them probably for things like your centaurs, and if you were recruiting them, your satyrs, because your other option is a Minotaur Lord, who is more expensive, to be fair, but the Minotaur Lord can be recruited outside of forts in all forests, whereas a Satyr Commander cannot. So the Minotaur Lord, even though he's more expensive and he can lead more troops, he's not stealthy, but he is a very important option for you to consider as far as the kinds of things that you can do. And arguably, if you were going to do early game thugging, the Minotaur Lord is just a better chassis for thugging than Satyr Commanders. So generally I tend to discount that Satyr Commanders exist, but every so often they show up just because I feel like doing something random that involves not recruiting a Harpy. Harpies, by the way, also have 10, very, very, very low 10 leadership. And so now you have the two types of Centaur and Centauride Hierophants and Hierophantides. They both have their uses, but I think I tend to lean, again, ironically, into the Centaur Hierophant, and that is really just because of this 10% random chance of Earth. Personally, I think Earth and Death are one of the best options for you, because if you ever wanted to, you could then twice born and then get a Caren Centaur with an Earth random that would be able to do light thugging and buffing himself. But even though I say that, I don't really ever do that, just because Centaurs are larger size than your other mage options, even your Panic Apostates. And that means they're going to be more expensive to twiceborn in general. And even if you got the death random, you'd have to give them a skull staff, which is then just more death cost on top of it. So you're not really going to see it a whole lot. The water and nature random, if you ever got it, is also pretty good to have just in general. But you do get that on your other mages anyways. So I don't know. I just sort of tend to find myself getting the default click on Hierophant Centaurs rather than the Centaurides. And they also are equipped with the short bow and the long bow, just like their trooper variants. So yeah, that's just personal preference. Once you get into your main core of battle mages, you've got two different kinds of dryads and your ubiquitous Panic Apostate. And you'll note that none of your commanders are cap only, which is a lot of versatility and flexibility for your nation. So black dryads are very important insofar as they have a Holy 2, and they are a lot cheaper than your dryad hags. So it is not bad to be recruiting black dryads. You shouldn't think of it as like oh, I don't have enough gold, or I'm just going to be sad and recruit a black dryad. If anything, you would feel that way about recruiting a Centaur Hierophant, although the Hierophants or the Hierophantides are used more to lead expansion parties and things like that. But the Black Dryad, the reason Holy 2 is very important and very good on your nation is because of the national spells that you can do, specifically Regrowth. So the fact that you're still able to do Regrowth with a Black Dryad, where you wouldn't be able to afford a Dryad Hag, is really good. And these other paths are kind of meh. You can still do stuff with them. So nature, you can do things like the bark skin buffs and things like that. And glamour, you can do things like blur and other things like that. Plus, with Twilight, you can get up to glamour 2, and you can do all sorts of basic evocations or things like that. But in general, for most of your battle magic, you will want to be having Dryad Hags. So the fact that you have Black Dryads is really just for utilizing that Holy 2 in battle, and then having a cheaper option to forge the level 1 magic items. So things like Boots of the Messenger. I would use these guys to forge Boots of the Messenger instead of Dryad Hags. And I would be using them to forge low-level glamour items or low-level death items for whatever purpose that I can, so that the Dryad Hags could be doing things like researching or going into battle or things like that. So that's just my own 2 cents on that. As far as the Dryad Hags go, they are just really, really good. And I would argue that the Dryad Hags are your main battle mages over your Panic Apostates. Panic Apostates are very, very, very important for your nation, but I think you will find that you want to have more Dryad Hags than you want to have Panic Apostates. That's been just my personal experience. Your paths are Nature 2, Death, and Glamour, and very, very importantly, your Dryad Hags are not going to go any higher than Nature 2 ever without forging boosters for them. So that's one of the reasons why you need the Panic Apostates. But you are able to get Death 2 and potentially Death 3, which is pretty good, Glamour 2 and potentially Glamour 3, which is vital for your nation, Earth 1 or potentially Earth 2, which is also vital, and then Water 1 or up to Water 2, which is kind of fine, but you can also get Water 2 in other ways. Each of these has its own uses, but we're going to go over those mostly in game because there's so much to cover with the kind of battle magic that you have access to that it would just take a whole video in and of itself for going over Dryad Hags and Panic Apostates and things like that. And we're probably already going pretty long on this video. So as far as Panic Apostates go, the all-important Nature 3 and Death 2. And the reason I say all-important is that this specific cross path is what the spell Caren Fortress has been changed to. Instead of being just Nature 4, it is now Nature 3, Death 2, which means that any Panic Apostate, as soon as you recruit it, is able to cast that spell. And so that is great. That is a game changer for the nation of Asphodel. In addition to that, you are able to get up to Nature 4, potentially Nature 5, just without any boosters, which is amazing. Death 3 and potentially Death 4, which is also very, very important, but very difficult to rely on, especially if you decide that you want more Dryad Hags than Panic Apostates. And then Earth 1, potentially Earth 2, but even having Earth 1 is great for thugging. And then Water 1, potentially Water 2, which is also great for thugging because of the Nature Water crosspath, and also very, very easily breaks you into foul vapors and is something that is important for you to consider on both your sacreds and your troops in general, that you are able to cast foul vapors pretty much in every battle if you wanted to. And lastly, we're going to go over your site, and your site is the Caren Grove. The Caren Grove, interestingly enough, it will by itself increase growth in your capital up to a maximum of 4. So even if you don't take growth scales on your pretender, which why would you not want to, you would still be able to get growth in specifically your capital. So that's great. One of the very, very important things about Asphodel specifically is that you have the highest, well, except for Airmore, obviously, but other than Airmore, you have the highest gem income in the game with 6 and 1 death gem, so 7 gems total. However, that is also added onto by your starting temple, which gives you +1 nature gems, which means your gem income on turn 1 is 8 gems per turn, which can even be boosted by your pretender choices, which we'll get into in the next video. But you can sort of see comparatively with the other nations, you're going to have 5 and 4 and 1 is 5. So basically every other nation, again, excluding Airmore, is going to have 5 gem income where you are starting at 8. As you can see in this particular sample province, we've got almost all of the types of carrion that are available to Asphodel. Starting with your carrion harpies. Carrion harpies are sort of funnily weird in that they are the highest attack density troop option in the game. And the reason I say that is because they have 2 sleep vine attacks, each of which does 3 attacks. And they are size 2, which means that you can fit 5 of them per square. Which means that per square, carrion harpies have a maximum of 30 attack density, which can be doubled to 60 if you hit that square with quickness, which is kind of insane. Now, keeping in mind that their attack sucks, they do not do any real physical damage. Just like all sleep vine attacks, their damage is fatigue only, but it is a high fatigue damage. And so it's likely to bypass armor, even though it is not armor negating or anything, or armor penetrating or anything like that. But obviously the fact that it is magic resistance negates, not magic resistance half or anything like that, and the fact that it doesn't affect inanimate beings is a very, very huge limiting factor to this crazy attack density here. But it's very important to remember that you can do some very crazy shenanigans with harpies where you just specifically filter them out into a square like this and then give them somebody with like a water path and just give them quickness, and these guys will just instantly put somebody to sleep. Like as soon as they make contact, if they don't all die, whoever they are facing up against, even if they just negate a bunch of their attacks, still probably going to be 100 fatigue right away, like turn 1 on contact, which can be really, really funny to see in a case example. Aside from that, you've got other carrion beasts, and again, the carrion beasts, which includes the harpy mannequins, are the kind that you're going to get only in forests. So we've got carrion wolves and we've got carrion boars. They're sort of two different variations of small, light, fast attack options, which can be used on sort of attack rear commands and things like that. And their combat speed is a lot higher than your other options, so you can sort of surprise people like that. The other option that you have for that are these carrion horses, which are the same size as your centaurs, and also other horses, obviously. And so carrion horses are important to keep in mind, because if you give them sort of like a separate order in the back and then you give them in large, they're actually going to be able to displace and wade through the other people that were in front of them. And so you can have a group of these guys and really, really heavily buff them, and then have them displace and wade through to the front and then just wail on people. I don't know if it's necessarily a great strategy, but it's sort of one of those things that you can do if you're really just micromanaging and don't just want to throw everyone in a single blob and just hurl the death ball at people. The other options that you're again going to be able to get in forests, and this is more based on your magic skills, if you have higher magic skills, you're more likely to see them, are the carrion minotaurs, which have some actually pretty good attacks, but the problem is that they have low attack skill. So the things about mannequins in general is that they rely on reducing the enemy defense from harassment or from putting them to sleep in order to hit them, because otherwise they're just generally speaking really, really bad. And that's kind of why in a matchup between Long Dead and Carrion, the Long Dead will honestly typically probably win, because the Long Dead tend to have longer length weapons and also have higher protection from various armors and stuff like that, and better attack skill and defense skill. So even though they have less hit points, because Carrions tend to have quite a bit of hit points. Carrion bears are one of the larger versions of your hit point pools, and again, the size allows them to be put in the back if you have a critical mass of them, give them a lot of buffs, and then have them wade to the front and begin wailing on people once they are all fluffed up. The same cannot be said of carrion behemoths, and it's very important to remember this, because carrion behemoths have trample, and anybody that has trample is not able to displace friendly troops. That's just a quirk of the coding and the way that this kind of mechanic works, is that Illwinter decided they didn't want tramplers to be able to just damage their own units in order to get to the front. So what you really need to do if you're going to utilize these kind of behemoths and elephants that way is you want to put them in a corner and you want to give them the fluffs, and then you want them to attack rear so that they hit the side and go around your force of troops and hit them from the side. Of course, because they are tramplers, they suffer from the same kind of usual thing of getting surrounded and poked to death, but you can give them the national carrion national Asphodel spell for regrowth, and that'll help them a little bit. You can give them all sorts of defensive buffs, and they also have a fear aura. So if you didn't want them to go into the middle of an enemy formation and die, you can just set them in the back, and they'll sit behind your front line of guys because they're not able to wade to the front and displace people. And the fear aura, well, hopefully, will permeate outward from them to the line of contact and cause the enemy formation to rout. So they still have a use in that particular way as well. Now, the kind that you're going to see the most are these mannequins, and that's because the mannequins are the only kind of Caren that you're going to see appearing in any province that is not a forest, which is going to be, generally speaking, most of your provinces. And they are just sort of fine. They are, like I said, in a matchup between Long Dead, probably not as good as Long Dead just because of the low attack skill, low defense skill, and lack of equipment. But they have higher HP pools. Their magic resistance, I believe, is significantly better than General Long Dead or Soulless. And so those are notable benefits to having mannequins. But they have the very important weaknesses of being both undead and magic beings, which means that they can suffer from the tags that apply debuffs to both of those or either of those, which can be a very, very big downside for them. The better version of mannequins are the Mandragora. They have higher magic resistance, higher hit points, better attack and defense skill, twice as many sleep vine attacks, but otherwise are basically the same in terms of weaknesses. You also get the kind of things like Satyr mannequins, which are slight buff increases from your normal mannequins, and the kind of things that you will only see in forests. Now, as far as your sacred options go, you have Sagittarians, which are a holdover from Dominions 5. Sagittarians have the upgraded carrion bow, which I'm not going to go over in demonstration on how that works because I did that in my previous video and I very much liked that demonstration. So we'll just leave it there. But basically, they are a vine bow that causes entanglement, but in addition to that, can have a chance of applying carrion seed, which will reanimate permanently anybody that dies in the battle, which actually applies both to enemies and friendly troops if you hit your own troops with carrion seeds and then they die, and will reanimate them permanently as carrion, and that type of carrion can vary depending on what the target is that dies. And it doesn't have to be the bow that kills them, it can be anything that kills them later on in the battle as soon as that debuff has been applied. They are actually quite good in melee as well. They have a lot of attacks, and one of those attacks is a Vine Whip, which is going to do a max of 1 point of damage, but also, importantly, extra fit on hit is going to be Entanglement, which means that they are able to very heavily debuff the line of contact that they get into. Problem is that they are size 5, and so any enlargement is going to make them 1 per square, which can sort of reduce their effectiveness in melee combat. And your other option, the new type of Carrion Sacred, is going to be the Carrion Fury, which, to be honest, I'm going to have to say Carrion Fury is my MVP for this game. I just absolutely love these guys. They are just monsters in combat. Their protection is all natural protection and is one of the highest for any of the mannequins that are either the sacred or non-sacred versions. But it's important to note, because it is so high, it's kind of difficult to increase that with protection spells. Things like earth buffs or nature buffs will not increase it very high. However, it does go even higher once you go berserk. In melee combat, they're sort of, I say glass cannons, but they are very tanky with their hit points. Plus, because you're able to give them regrowth, they can have regeneration. So they're not really glass cannons, but what I meant by glass cannons is they pack a massive punch. They hit for their sleep vines, which have actually very, very high attack because of their attack skill, which then is increased by Berserk. So that means they can have up to 15 attack sleep vines. They have Skull Club, which is kind of similar to Machaca's Spirit Club, but it is effect on damage. So you're only going to be applying this extra fatigue damage on top of your Dark Vines, fatigue damage on damage, which, because that club is a two-handed weapon that does 32 damage without being Berserk, you're going to be having to hit something very, very beefy in order without killing them in order to apply this Dark Slumber effect. And it's not like an AoE thing. It's only on the target that is damaged. So it's kind of like very situational that the fatigue from the club is going to be impacting anything. And then on top of that, they also have a length 0 gore attack with even more damage. Then once you factor in the damage increase from Berserk, which again, this is a two-handed weapon, is going to be even higher, plus stacking on whatever buffs from their Bless they get for things like Blood Surge or more strength or more attack or resistances. These guys are just so killy. They just delete entire squares. As soon as they hit, it's just like gone. So they're just really fun to watch in combat. They're a lot of fun. And once you get a critical mass of them, they can be a very, very tanky and killy front line. And the way that they're better, I would argue, than Black Minotaurs or Minotaurs in general is that they don't trample. The fact that they don't trample means that they're not going to wade into the middle of an enemy formation and get surrounded and poked down. They are a solid front line, and that means they hit the enemy on line of contact, they delete enemy squares, the next line of the enemy moves up, and they delete those too, and they just keep chopping down. I've seen these guys go like burt through like all sorts of different kinds of things, like Shard Guards, Gigantes, like Flagrant Tyrants, just all sorts of things. Just nothing can stop these guys. Now, once you get into the other commander options that you have available to you as far as reanimation goes, and then also Twice Spawn, you've got the Caren Centaurs. And this is both what you can get from the spell, the national spell that summons Caren Centaurs, which is for 8. The Caren Centaurs are going to be a Reanimator Priest, which is a tag that you get for being the nation of Asphodel. And they're kind of fine. They have an interesting sort of scenario where they can be pretty good thugs, which is what I was talking about earlier for Twice Spawning a Caren or a Centaur Hierophant, because then they can give themselves buffs and things like that. Now, what's cool is that all 3 of these attacks are actually innate attacks. So if I give him like this kind of shock trident, it just gets added in addition to his other attacks. So you can actually get a lot of attacks out from one of these guys, and they can have a very high attack density, even though they're size 5. So it's something you can do, but just because their magic paths are going to be so low, it's not something you probably want to do. You get these guys both from the spell and also just free spawn sometimes in temples with high dominion. And whenever I tend to get them, I prefer usually to put them on Reanimate and the province that they appear in and forget that they exist, unless I need them sort of like reanimating closer to the front line, in which case I'll spend a couple of turns. But they also are important to remember that they have a very high undead leadership. And so if you're not needing them to reanimate, then you can use them to ferry a lot of your undead troops around. And so that's important also to keep in mind. You don't really need to do that just because you have access to the other commander option, which is the Caren Commander, which you are also going to be getting a lot of for free spawn. And these are things that you cannot summon in any way, but you will get a lot of them because they appear in any province, and that's not just forested temples. It's really just any province with sort of moderate to high dominion. So you'll see a lot of these guys, and again, they are able to thug out and buff themselves. Now, they replace their claw attack in this particular case with a weapon, but they can have a lot of attack. You probably just don't care. I'll probably just tend to sort of put them on stay behind command troops or hold and stay behind troops, and then just forget that they exist. They are just literally troop farriers for me. But you can do other stuff with them. You could give them like a bow or something like that. I don't seem to have any bows because I don't really do that. But it is a thing that you can do. Now, the other kind of thing that you can summon are the Caren ladies, but this is actually a twice-born version of the Caren lady. When you summon them for, I believe it is 16 nature gems, so twice as much as a Carian centaur, you get not as good stats. You get nature 1 plus a random, and the random that you get is glamour 1 or water 1 with a holy 2. So they're a holy 2 reanimator, which means you're reanimating twice as much, which is natural for twice the cost, but pretty much that's it. And then you have a very low path mage. It's a lot better to twice-born Carian ladies in order to get that, or I should say dryad hags, in order to get these paths. And the two reasons that you would want to do that is, one, your dryad hags tend to get diseased a lot, especially if you take, for example, Cold Dominion. And when that happens, you twice-born them, you drown them somewhere, or you suicide them into like a throne province or whatever, and then you get these guys back. And then, in addition to that, you may get lucky and even get another higher death path, which can be very, very beneficial to slowly creeping up for your death magic in order to make boosters and things like that. And last but very, very not least are the Carian Lords. And you have the two types of varieties of Carian Lords. This one in particular is the twice-born version. And you can tell that it's a twice-born version because the twice-born version does not have Holy 3. However, it is an upgrade from a regular pan because a regular pan is not sacred. And that means that they are very expensive for their upkeep. Now, if you want them to be not very expensive for their upkeep, you twice-born them, in which case they are literally 0 gold. And they're sacred. The sacred means that they can take your bless, but they can't bless themselves. So, more often than not, you will want them to run in pairs, either with some dryad hags or twice-born dryad hags, or with another Carian Lord that you summoned, which is Holy 3. Or you can obviously give them things like flasks of holy water, in which case they will be blessed, and things like that. These guys are very, very exceptional thugs. We can go over how that's going to be. They're going to be thuggable later on in the series, and also you can watch my previous video, in which case I showcase an example of a very, very fun kind of Carian Lord thug. And but what is important to note about Carian Lord, the summonable version, is that they get Holy 3, but also they get the same randoms as your recruitable Carian Lords, which are all 4 of these, but not the 10%, which means you're never going to get a Nature 5 summoned Carian Lord. You're never going to get a Death 4 summoned Carian Lord, but you are going to be able to get Death 3, Nature 4, an Earth random, a Water random, and so that's really great. Alright, and that's an overview of Asphodel the Nation, and in the next video we're going to go over Pretender design and some basic research ideas and spell options and strategies, and then we're going to get right into the game.